The snow was still falling when he spotted her. Up near the timberline, where wind bit clean through a man's coat, and even the pine trees stood, bowed with silence. She stood like something out of a ghost story, barefoot, rag-wrapped and still, not shivering, just still. Her skin was blue-tinged, the way it gets when the blood stops moving. Hair stuck to her face in wet streaks. No coat, no sound, and no name. The mountain man, known in town as Boone Cutter, tightened his grip on the rifle slung over his shoulder. This high up, alone, anything could be bait. A ploy, a ghost, a spirit. But her eyes didn't hold the shimmer of trickery. They held nothing at all. She didn't even flinch when he approached. "Where's your people?" he asked. She blinked. Her lips parted, but no sound came. He dropped to one knee, slow and deliberate, scanning the tree line. No movement, no tracks but hers, and they weren't fresh. Hell, she looked about 17, maybe younger, white skin beneath the grime, but not the kind bred from town. She had the look of someone who hadn't spoken in months, maybe years. Boone knew silence like that, knew the weight of it. "Let's go," he muttered, as if she'd answered. She didn't move. He rose, shrugged out of his heavy coat, and wrapped it around her shoulders like a cloak. She didn't resist. That scared him more than if she had. But let's go back to where it started. Boone Cutter hadn't planned to ride high that week. He'd holed up for the winter in his trapper's cabin, 2 days' ride from the nearest town, 5 from any law, and meant to stay there till spring, push the rivers loose. But something in his gut had told him to check the higher snares, even though the storms had rolled in thick and early. The trap lines gave him meat, furs, something to keep his hands busy. But they also gave him time to think about the war, about the burned house, about the girl buried beneath it, about the letter he never mailed to his father, and the one he did. The truth was, Boone didn't talk much anymore either. The cold suited him, so did the silence. But that morning, with the wind slashing sideways and his horse nervous under him, he'd felt something change in the trees, as if they were holding their breath. Watching. That's when he saw her, standing at the edge of a clearing, with snow up to her calves and a dead rabbit in her hands, like she'd meant to eat it raw. Now, hours later, she sat by his fire, not warming her hands, just staring into the flames, like she didn't understand them. The coat swallowed her frame. He'd cut up old blankets for her feet, made her tea, laid out jerky and cornbread. She didn't touch any of it. Just sat. "You got a name?" he asked again, voice low. No answer. "You understand me." A pause, then the faintest nod. That meant something. Meant she wasn't dumb, just broken. Boone leaned back in his chair. The fire popped, casting shadows across the log walls. He studied her out the corner of his eye, the way she flinched at nothing, the way her lips moved, barely, like she was forming words to herself she didn't dare speak aloud. "You run from somebody?" he asked. "Nothing." "Family?" Still nothing. "Tribe?" Her head jerked, just slightly. Maybe recognition, maybe fear. Boone exhaled, ran a hand over his beard. He'd seen this before. Girls gone silent, after what men did to them. Not all of them lived. Not all of them wanted to. But this one had come higher into the mountains, into death itself, instead of staying wherever she was. That meant fight. Somewhere deep in her, she still wanted to live. That was enough for him. "You stay here long as you want," he said, voice slow, measured, like talking to a skittish horse. "Ain't no one coming through that door without me letting him, and I don't let many." He poured tea into a second tin cup and set it near her hands. "They call me Boone. You don't gotta say yours if you don't want. But if you got one, you can leave it here. No one'll steal it." He leaned back again and let the fire talk. Let the wind whistle outside the chinked walls. Let her sit in peace, for once. An hour passed. Then, soft as breath, he heard the tin cup shift. She picked it up with both hands, like it was holy. Her eyes closed for the first time since he found her. Next morning, he found her outside, sweeping snow from his steps with a pine branch. Didn't say a word, didn't look up when he stepped out with his rifle, just kept clearing snow like she was earning her keep. Boone let her. She didn't eat much, but what she did, she earned. He taught her how to stack kindling, how to gut rabbits, how to mend with sinew. She watched closely, learned fast, didn't ask questions. But she wouldn't write either. He'd tried, offered her paper, charcoal, even drew little stick figures to help. She only stared. On the sixth night, as snow lashed the windows and coyotes howled in the hills, she startled awake from the floor beside the fire. No sound, no scream, just panic. Eyes wide, breath held. Boone sat up, watched her. She looked at him like she'd done something wrong, like just breathing too loud might get her whipped. He spoke softly. "You're safe here." She didn't answer, but that time she didn't go back to sleep either. She sat up beside the fire, watching the flames until dawn. Boone made coffee, set a piece of bread beside her. He didn't speak, neither did she, but when he stepped outside to feed the mule, he glanced back through the door. She was eating, real slow, like her body was remembering what it meant to want to live. He gave her a name 3 days later, Willa Faye. It came to him like something whispered from the hills. He said it aloud once, soft, like testing a song, and she didn't flinch, just looked at him, then down at her hand. "You can change it if you like," he said. She didn't, and from that day on, he called her Willa, even if she never said it back. The trapper cabin sat alone on a ridge of pine and snow, a 2-day ride from any gossip, but word always found its way down a mountain. By the second week of January, Boone rode into Dalton Ridge for flour, beans, and lamp oil. When he stepped through the swinging doors of Griff's Dry Goods, heads turned, not because Boone Cutter had arrived, but because of who he came with. The girl had shoes now, soft hide moccasins he'd sewn from scrap deer leather, and a coat that nearly drowned her, patched and quilted from old trade blankets. She still didn't speak, but she walked beside him like a shadow, hands folded, eyes low. Griff raised a brow as Boone approached the counter. "Brought company this time," the shopkeeper muttered, scratching at his whiskers. Boone nodded. "She ain't from around here?" "No kidding." The silence behind them thickened. A few townsfolk lingered near the stove, watching, not hiding it, just staring. Boone measured beans into a sack. "She's staying up the ridge with me. Just needs food." "That's so?" Griff's tone was careful. "She a squaw, or just gone wild?" Boone looked up slowly. "She's a person. That's what she is." Griff held his gaze a beat too long. "Just saying. Some folks talk when they see a girl without a name show up in a place like Dalton." "She's got a name."
"Yeah?"
"Willa." Griff paused, then handed over the sugar without another word. But Boone felt it. The shift, the weight of eyes. When they stepped back outside, the snow was falling again. Quiet, fat flakes. Willa hesitated at the edge of the porch, then glanced up at him. "I know," Boone said. "I don't like them either." They rode back in silence. That night, Boone poured the last of the coffee and sat across from her at the fire. Willa stitched rabbit pelts by lamplight. Her hands were fast now, confident. "You did good today," he said. "Standing in town like that, folks'll talk, but you didn't flinch." She didn't answer, but something shifted in her face. Not quite a smile, not quite. Boone leaned forward, elbows on knees. "They'll wonder why I brought you down, why you don't speak, why your feet were bloody when I found you, why you sleep light as a deer, and flinch at the wind." Willa set down the needle. Boone didn't move. "They'll ask if I know what you are, if you're Comanche, if you were stolen, if you're Willa's hands folded in her lap. Her eyes didn't rise, but they didn't fall either. "I told him you're Willa Faye. That's enough for me." She stared at the fire for a long time. Then she reached for the needle again. 2 days later, trouble came on horseback. Boone was chopping wood when he saw the riders. 4 men, all townsfolk, 2 with rifles slung low and eyes already sharp with judgment. They didn't call out, just rode up slow, stopped at the edge of the yard, and waited. Boone leaned the axe against the stump and walked forward, jaw clenched. "Morning," he said. The man in front, Ephraim Toll, nodded. His gray beard caught snowflakes like soot in cotton. "Boone, we got questions." "Bet you do." "About the girl." Boone crossed his arms. "She's under my roof. That's all that matters." "You sure about that?" Boone glanced toward the cabin. The smoke from the stovepipe curled steady. No movement in the windows. "She hurt someone?" Ephraim hesitated. "No." "She steal?" "No." "Then this ain't a law matter." One of the other men, Jeb Marsh, Boone thought, spoke up. "Folks are just concerned." "Concerned?" "Don't sit right, Cutter. You bring a girl out of nowhere into town. Don't say where she's from. Don't explain why she don't talk." Boone's voice cut low. "You ever see what a wagon train leaves behind, Jeb?" Ever see a girl with her family's blood in her hair? The younger man fell quiet. Ephraim's eyes didn't move. All we're saying is, maybe it'd be better for everyone if she found somewhere else to stay. Someplace proper. You offering your own home, Ephraim? Boone asked. Ephraim didn't answer. Boone stepped forward once. Not fast, but enough that the horses shifted. You boys done saying your piece? No one answered. Boone's hand rested easy near his belt, though his holster stayed quiet. The snow crunched. Willa stepped out onto the porch. She didn't speak, didn't wave, just stood there, face blank, hair tied back, still as ice. Ephraim glanced at her, then at Boone. She got folks coming for her, Cutter. You think on that? I hope they do, Boone said. The men rode off without another word. That night, Boone didn't speak much. He cooked beans, repaired a bootlace, checked the rifle, sat near the fire, watching the snow stack up on the windowsill. Willa sat in the corner, cross-legged on the floor, sharpening a skinning knife with care. The rhythm of stone on steel filled the room. Boone finally looked at her. They'll come again. She nodded. You scared? She thought a long time before shaking her head. Good, he said, voice rougher than he meant. She watched him. Then, for the first time, she moved toward the table, took a bit of charcoal, and pressed it to paper. He sat forward. Slowly, carefully, she wrote a name, but it wasn't hers. It was someone else's. And Boone felt something cold press into his gut. The name was Apache, and it was the name of a band that hadn't been seen this far north in 5 years. They looked at her. They're coming for you, ain't they? Her eyes filled, just for a moment. Then she nodded, once, quiet, final. And outside, somewhere deep in the dark timber, a coyote howled. But it wasn't a coyote. Not really. The wind had teeth that night. Boone stood on the porch with a lantern in hand, eyes scanning the ridgeline. The snow wasn't falling anymore, but the silence it left behind was worse. Heavy. Expectant. Not even the owls dared call. Willa stood just behind the doorframe, watching him, arms wrapped tight around herself. She hadn't eaten all day, hadn't touched the bread on the table. She just kept watching the trees like she was waiting for someone, maybe many someones, to appear. And Boone knew that feeling well. You don't survive this long in the mountains without learning what silence can mean, what the trees can whisper, what hoofbeats feel like in your bones before they ever reach your ears. They'd be scouts first. Always were. You don't storm a cabin without knowing who's inside, what they got, and how ready they are to die for it. Boone didn't sleep that night. Neither did Willa. He sat at the table, rifle laid across his lap. Willa sat on the floor, with her back against the hearth, the fire low. At some point she dozed off, head bent like a prayer, arms still locked around her knees. He watched her, the way a man watches something he knows he can't keep. Come morning, Boone found the first sign. A broken sprig of pine, placed deliberately across his trapline trail. Not windfall, not animal, human, Apache, most likely. A silent message, the kind you leave when words aren't welcome. We see you. Boone disarmed the snare and left nothing behind. No scent, no bait, no metal glint. When he returned to the cabin, he closed the shutters. They're watching, he told her. Willa's lips pressed together. Not fear, just readiness. Like she'd known all along. Boone walked to the back wall, pried up a floorboard, and took out a long-wrapped bundle. His old army Colt, still oiled, still heavy with a weight he never liked carrying. I ain't gonna give you up, he said. Willa's gaze didn't waver. Her throat worked, but no sound came. You hear me? Boone said it louder. I don't care what town says, or tribe says. You're under this roof now. Her lip trembled then, just slightly. Boone turned away and checked the cylinder. 6 rounds. Same 6 as always. By afternoon, the quiet grew sharper. Birds fled the trees. Snow melt dripped in unnatural silence. Boone knew that sound. He'd heard it at Shiloh, at Little Washita, at the edge of the Brazos, when the blood soaked into red clay, and the ground steamed like breath. He kept the rifle close, the pistol closer. But no one came. Not yet. Willa sat across from him, hands on her knees, breathing shallow. She hadn't moved for over an hour. And then it came. A knock. Not loud. 3 short taps on the wood of the door. No creak. No voice. Boone stood slowly, gun already raised. Willa didn't move. Didn't breathe. Boone opened the door with the muzzle leading. Nothing. No one. Just a bundle sitting on the porch, wrapped in hide, tied with sinew. He knelt, gun still raised, and tugged it inside. Inside was a stone arrowhead, a long black braid, and a strip of buckskin, with symbols burned into it. Boone stared at it, not understanding all of it, but enough. "This is a trade," he said quietly. "This is a question." Willa came forward, slow. She knelt beside the bundle. Fingers trembling, she reached for the braid. Tears hit the hide before her hands did. She didn't sob, didn't scream, just pressed her forehead to the braid like it had weight, like it had light. Boone watched her for a long time. "They're asking if you're alive," he said. "Or maybe if you still belong." He wasn't sure which. That night, Boone built a second fire in the back clearing. As signal, he left meat near the flames. Nothing else. No words. Just respect. And in the dark, Willa stood beside him, eyes wide, face streaked with quiet tears. "Who was she?" he asked, finally, motioning to the braid. Willa didn't speak, but her hand lifted, trembled once in the air, and formed the shape of a cradle. "Sister." Boone felt it then, in his chest. That cold ache of truth. "You were taken." She nodded. Boone stared at the fire. "And they're coming to see if what they lost is still here." Willa stepped closer to him, laid her hand on his arm. She was trembling, but she stood straight, and in her eyes, for the first time, was a question. "Will you let them take me?" Boone looked away, jaw clenched. He didn't answer, because he didn't know. By dawn, they came. Not a war party. Not yet. Just three, tall, silent, shadows stitched in buckskin and iron. One stood in the tree line while the other two approached the cabin, weapons slung but visible. Boone stepped out to meet them. He didn't bring the rifle, just the braid. The younger of the two men stepped forward and knelt before the fire without speaking. He laid down a feather, then a stone, round and smooth like river glass, then a small carved animal, fox or coyote. Boone didn't move, didn't know if he should speak. Willa stepped past him. She walked barefoot, slow, until she stood before the men. She knelt. The younger man reached forward and touched her chin. Not rough, not soft, just familiar. She didn't flinch. She looked into his eyes, and slowly she opened her mouth. The sound that came out was broken, cracked, but it was a word, a name, and Boone heard it clear as thunder. "Kai." The young man swallowed hard, then nodded once, and stood. The older man watched Boone, a long, unreadable stare. Then he nodded too. No words, just an understanding. They turned and disappeared into the trees. Willa stayed kneeling by the fire. Boone sat beside her, and for the first time, he didn't feel like the one offering shelter. He felt like the one being forgiven. Willa didn't speak again for 3 days, but it didn't matter. After the night by the fire, things had shifted. Not just between Boone and Willa, but in the very air around them, as if the cabin had finally exhaled something it had been holding too long. As if Willa had set something down, and Boone could hear the sound it made when it hit the ground. She rose early now, not to hide, not to work without being asked, just to be. She carried water from the stream without fear. She tended the mule, brushed it slow and steady like she was taming something inside herself. She'd hum, sometimes soft, low melodies that weren't from any hymn book Boone knew. Boone didn't press her for more. He knew the sound of a woman healing, and he knew better than to interrupt it. But the snow kept melting, and spring was coming. And with spring came choices. One morning, Willa found the old cedar box under Boone's cot. She wasn't snooping. She'd just been sweeping. But the box was uncovered, and the latch was undone. Inside were small, careful things. A woman's comb, a gold earring, a faded photograph of a young girl with Boone's eyes and a ribbon in her hair. Willa looked up at him from the floor. Boone froze in the doorway, tin coffee cup, halfway to his lips. "That's Ella," he said. "My daughter." He walked in slow, sat beside her. "She's gone." Willa's hands moved to the photo, not touching, just hovering, as if waiting for permission. Boone gave a small nod. She was 6. Fever took her. Same winter her mother died. Willa lowered her head. "She didn't talk much either," Boone added. "Always off in her own little world. She used to bury buttons in the snow like they were seeds. Said if we planted enough, the next spring we'd get a dress tree." His voice cracked at the end, just slightly. Willa turned toward him. and for the first time, reached for his hand. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. 2 days later, Kai returned. He came alone this time. No horses, no noise. Boone spotted him from the porch, standing beneath the trees, waiting. Willa stepped out without hesitation. They didn't speak, just stood in the space between. Kai lifted his hand and slowly unrolled a piece of cloth. Inside was a necklace, twine strung with bone and shell, worn smooth by time. He extended it to her. She didn't take it. Not right away. She turned to Boone, and for the first time she spoke his name. Boone. It came out raw, like wind through a cracked door, but it was there. It was real. He stepped toward her. Slow. She looked up at him, eyes bright with something he hadn't seen in her before. Not just grief, not just fear, but purpose. I want to stay. It was barely above a whisper, but it rang louder than any gunshot he'd ever heard. Boone swallowed hard. He turned to Kai. The young man's face didn't change, but he bowed his head slightly and stepped back, not in defeat, in understanding. He left the necklace on the porch and vanished into the trees like smoke. That night, Boone laid 2 tin plates on the table. Not one. Willa set out the cornbread, sat down across from him, and ate like someone who knew where she belonged. They didn't speak much. Didn't have to. But something sacred had rooted between them. Not romance. Not yet. Just quiet truth. And truth, Boone had learned, was harder to kill than anything else. Weeks passed. Word came from Dalton Ridge that the railroad men were heading east again, bringing noise, timber companies, surveyors. Boone didn't ride into town anymore. Not since Ephraim and his kind started spitting in the dirt whenever they saw Willa's footprints near the mercantile. Let him. He had all he needed on the ridge. One morning, Willa stood at the edge of the bluff behind the cabin, the wind whipping her dress like smoke. Boone came up behind her, silent. She didn't turn, but her voice reached back toward him. My real name was Tana. He didn't say anything, just waited. My mother gave it to me before the raid, before the bluecoats took our village. Her voice stayed steady. They put sacks over our heads, split us up, said we'd be made proper. Boone's hands clenched into fists. I haven't said that name in 5 years, she whispered. Not even to myself. She turned to him now, face calm, eyes shining. But I want you to call me Willa, because she's the one who came back. Boone blinked slow, then tipped his head. All right then, Willa Faye. She smiled. Not big. Just enough. Enough to split the mountain wide open. That night, they burned the sack. The one she'd been found in. The one she never asked about, but always knew was there, buried under kindling, tucked away like a ghost. They set it on the fire without ceremony, watched it curl and blacken. Willa stared into the flames. Boone stood beside her. Neither spoke. They didn't have to. Because in the crackle of that fire, and the scent of singed cloth and snowmelt, something was finally being laid to rest. Not just a girl with no voice, no name, no shoes, but the man who thought he'd buried his story with a photograph in a box. Now there were 2 of them, breathing, living, survivors. And spring was coming. The spring rains came early that year. They soaked the hills in green, ran cold and clean through the mountain streams, and softened the earth until it smelled like forgiveness. Wild flowers pushed up along the ridge. Bluebell, paintbrush, firewheel, and Willa knelt in the wet grass, each morning, touching petals like they were sacred things. She was stronger now. She carried herself different, straighter. Her voice, though rare, came easier. Sometimes just a word, sometimes more. She asked Boone how to trap, how to skin, how to mend a saddle strap. She wanted to know everything. And Boone, quiet, careful Boone, taught her without question. He never asked about the in-between, never about the gap between who she was and what she had survived. She offered pieces, now and then. One night, by the fire, she said the name of a soldier. Another night, she pointed to her shoulder and whispered, "He branded me. Said it would make me unwanted." Boone didn't flinch, just kept the fire going. "You're not unwanted," he said. And she believed him, not because he said it, but because of the way he handed her the coffee first every morning, because he let her fix the mule's harness without looking over her shoulder, because when she reached for his hand now, he held it with both of his. That kind of love didn't need naming. It just grew, quiet, deep, like roots under snow. One evening in May, A figure appeared at the edge of the clearing. Boone was oiling his rifle. Willa was weaving willow strips into a basket. The man was young. Apache. Same cheekbones as Kai. Same long braids. But this one held something different. Authority. He didn't step forward. Just stood, waiting. Boone rose slow. You know him? Willa set down the basket. His name is Sonny. My cousin. She moved to the porch, barefoot in the grass. No hesitation. Sonny nodded once to Boone, then turned to Willa. His voice was calm, formal. They say you are well. I am. They say the white man did not take you, that you walked back. She glanced at Boone, then back. He didn't take me. He gave me a story. Sonny's jaw twitched, just barely. Some say it's time you told it. With us. Willa looked down at her hands. They want me to come back? They never stop. She glanced again at Boone. He didn't speak, didn't even blink, because this was not a question for him to answer. Willa stepped down into the grass and faced her cousin square. Then tell them this, she said, voice steady. I'll come, but not to be hidden again. Not to be kept in shadow. If I speak, they will listen. They will, Sonny said. And I will return. When? She looked back at the cabin. At Boone. At the smoke curling from the stovepipe. The mule grazing under a pine. The trail they'd walked together every morning for months. After the rains, she said softly. Sonny nodded once. Then vanished into the woods like wind over water. They didn't talk about it much in the days that followed. Boone didn't ask when she'd leave, or if she'd come back. Willa didn't promise anything she couldn't know, but their hands found each other more often. At the table, on the porch, while washing dishes in the creek. Sometimes she'd hum while he whittled. Sometimes he'd lean his head against hers without saying a word. And sometimes, when the stars came out, she'd sit on the cabin steps and whisper in both Apache and English. Names of people she remembered. Of people who never made it. Boone sat nearby. Always quiet. Always listening. The last night before she left, Willa cooked the meal. Rabbit stew. Corn cakes. Wild onions she'd foraged herself. Boone watched her move around the cabin, sure-footed, barefoot, humming softly. Not like a guest. Not like someone passing through, but like someone who'd built a life. I'll come back, she said that night, beside the fire. You don't owe me that, Boone said. I'm not coming back, because I owe, she replied. I'm coming back, because this is the first place I didn't have to earn my breath. Boone stared at her. You're sure they'll listen? I'm sure they'll try. She reached into her skirt pocket and pulled something small. The photograph, the one of Ella. She held it with care, then tucked it between the logs on the mantel. She can stay here, Willa said. I think she'd want to. Boone's throat tightened. She's got a sister now, Willa whispered. When dawn broke, Willa stood at the edge of the clearing again. Same place she'd stood the day Boone found her. This time she wore soft buckskin boots. Her hair was braided, her eyes clear. Boone stood behind her, arms crossed. You'll walk alone? I won't be alone. She turned to him, stepped forward, took his hands, and kissed him. Slow. Sure. Not a promise, not a goodbye, just a truth. Then she turned and walked into the tree. Boone didn't follow, didn't call out, just watched her figure melt into green and shadow. Years later, Townsfolk still told the story of the mountain girl with no name, no shoes, no voice, found near dead by a loner trapper. No one trusted. They said she went back to her people, that she spoke for the ones who couldn't, that she taught English and Apache, translated treaties, told stories in the great council lodges, until even the elders sat quiet to hear her. But Boone Cutter didn't speak of her much. He just added a second chair to his porch, kept her photograph beside Ella's, and every spring, he left the door open, just a crack, in case the mountain wind decided to bring her home.